Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Avi Havivi's weekly Siddur class.
I think there's no more stalling, and we're up to the Amidah, unless someone disagrees with me on that. Unless someone says, oh, could we just talk about Musaf on Yom Kippur or something like that? That would be a long stalling thing. So we're up to the Amidah, weekday Amidah, and I think I don't want to do much introduction or talking about. I think I mostly want to jump in. Later on, we'll back up and talk about. But I think if we talk about the Amidah, that would be endless. But I think it'd be better to jump in. I'll say very little by way of intro. I'll say a couple things by way of intro. Number one, in rabbinic literature, the Amidah is referred to as Hatfilah, the prayer. So in rabbinic literature, meaning Talmudic sources, this is considered the core prayer, okay? Not the Shema, which you are required to say twice a day, but this is the core prayer. So this is for the rabbis, the most, I'm going to say, important thing in the Siddur. It's a thing that they call the prayer with a capital P. Just like, people from Manhattan say, I read it in the paper, and they know that they assume that that means the New York Times. Okay? So, Hatfilah, later called the Shmona Esrei, right, because of its 18 blessings, although then the blessings became 19, but they never changed the name, and also called the Amidah because it's the prayer that is said standing. And again, halachically, early on in the Mishnah, there's debate as to whether the nighttime Amidah is obligatory or optional. By Talmudic times, it becomes accepted as universally done and therefore technically optional, but de facto obligatory. So it's the prayer that we say 3 times a day. And in classic rabbinic literature, the Amidah is conceived of as an audience before the king. It's your personal audience before the monarch, which of course is hard for us to, glom onto conceptually because we don't live in a world of monarchs. But the rabbinic literature says the Amidah is in 3 parts because this is what you would do in your audience before a monarch. First, you would be flattering, right? So the first 3 brachot of the Amidah are called shevach, which means praise, right? You come before the monarch for your personal audience and you praise the monarch. O king, you are magnificent, you are amazing, you are the best king ever, and my ancestors served you for a long time ago because we are loyal to your household. So that's the first 3 brachot. Then the middle section, which is 13 blessings asking for stuff, is called bakasha, which means requesting. So then you would tell the king what your request is. We have a couple of examples of this in I was just reading something for another class, the Book of 2 Kings, where the widow comes before the king and says, they took my field and I'm now coming for justice. I want my field back, right? So people would come before the monarch with a request. So we have 13 requests. We're going to talk about all of them individually. And after you make your request, the third part, which is the last 3 brachot of the Amidah, is hodaya or hoda'ah, which means thanks or acknowledgement. So in your audience before the king, you come, you praise the king, then you ask for what you want. Wouldn't be polite to jump right in and asking for what you want without, flattering the king first. And then you say, thank you, oh, beneficent one, you are so beneficent. All right? So that is the structure of our Amidah. And as you probably know, the first 3 brachot and the last 3 brachot always stay the same, except for nighttime, we say Shalom Rav instead of Sim Shalom, the last bracha. And, in the daytime, we insert the priestly blessing. In the evening, we don't. And sometimes we have Kedushin, sometimes we don't. And on the high holidays, we insert the 4 passages, right? So, but in general, the first 3 brachot and the last 3 brachot are all the same, whether it's Shabbat, whether it's Yom Tov, whether it's Yom Kippur, okay? And it is the middle section which varies. So during the week, we have our creaturely human needs, and so we ask for stuff. On Shabbat and festivals, it is seen to be unseemly to ask for things. We don't pray for things, okay? And so on Shabbat, substituting for the middle 13, we have one long blessing, which is about the theme of the day, which is about menucha, rest. On Yom Tov, we have one long blessing in the middle, which is about the theme for the day, which is simcha, or joy. And then, as you know, like on Rosh Hashanah, we have Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofrot, and in Yom Kippur, we stick in all kinds of things. So it's the middle section of the Amidah, which changes depending on the occasion, weekday, Shabbos, festival, high holidays, whereas the opening three and the closing three are the same. Sometimes people complain about Musaf. There are those who complain about Musaf who say, I don't understand why we say the same thing we already said. To which my response is, oh, if you think we're saying the same thing we already said, that just means you're not praying the middle part of the Amidah, because the middle part of the Amidah on Shabbat, Shachrit, and Musaf are totally different from each other, okay, because they're on different themes. Shabbat Shachrit is about rest, menucha, and Shabbat Musaf is about Musaf. It's about the additional sacrifice of the day and the temple, okay. So first three and last three are the same, okay. Or people who complain that the Amidah is always the same. Again, that means to me, oh, you don't infuse the middle part of your Amidah with much kavanah, because there are plenty of opportunities to do that. So we're gonna talk about all of that stuff as we go along. But I think now, without further preamble, I'm going to jump in, and I'm not going to talk today about choreography. When do you bow and when do you do steps? I promise we're going to get to all that. Okay. I'll start with steps, even though I said we weren't going to do that. In the audience before the king, you would come into the king's throne room. So you take 3 steps forward into the presence of the king. But if all you did was take 3 steps forward, then everyone's chairs and benches would get all mixed up. And so the custom is you take 3 steps backwards, starting with your left foot, right? 1, 2, 3, feet together. Okay, we stand with feet together because, it's just like, that's the most respectful way to stand. By the way, Shulchan Aruch says you're supposed to stand with your hands over your heart. Most people don't do that anymore nowadays. So you take 3 steps back to prepare yourself, and then you take your 3 steps forward into your audience with the king. And we have a handy-dandy pasuk, verse from Psalms, which precedes the Amidah, and that pasuk, conveniently enough, was chosen because it has 6 words. So you say, Adonai sifatai tiftach, ufi yagi tilatecha. Hashem, open my lips so that my mouth might say your praise, right? They picked a perfect pasuk to be the one that leads you into Amidah, okay? And then I'm not going to do bowing today. So I'm just going to launch in. First bracha. Blessed are you, Hashem, our deity and the deity of our ancestors. Okay? God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. That is a phrase that is taken from the Bible. Okay? And in most non-Orthodox liberal congregations, we now add also the matriarchs. Now, there's a couple of different ways of doing that. So there is a conservative rabbinic responsum, or teshuvah, accepted by the Rabbinical Assembly. I don't remember, 2021, 40 years ago, maybe-ish, written by our own Rabbi Rembaum of Temple Beth Am, about adding the imahot, saying that it is optional to add the matriarchs. That's why we have page 36A and 36B, because it's optional, so we don't want to force it on people who feel traditional-minded and believe halakha says you're not supposed to change the wording of the first 3 or the last 3 brachot. We will do some Shulchan Aruch, some Jewish law code eventually about the rules of the Shulchan Aruch, but certainly the halakha does say you are not supposed to change the wording of the first 3 or the last 3 brachot. Okay? They are pretty standard. in all Siddurim. So, but the conservative responsum says we may add the imahot in the middle. So it's added as Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov. Then we add Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah. Okay. Although some people say we should really say Elohei Leah, Elohei Rachel. It's yet another mark of disrespect against poor Leah that we say Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, even though Jacob loved her more and thought he was marrying her. But in fact, he did marry Leah first. So let's mention her first. All right. But we have Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah. I want to point out at Ikar, they do it a different way, which I've heard at other places. Ikar didn't invent it, which is they say Elohei Avraham ve'Elohei Sarah, Elohei Yitzchak ve'Elohei Rivka, Elohei Yaakov ve'Elohei Leah ve'Elohei Rachel. So they match them up in their couples. That is actually how I do it in my private Amidah, and I will explain later, maybe probably not today, why I prefer it that way. It's a personal preference. It's not a halachic thing. And then, while we're on the imahot, while we're on the matriarchs, so the conservative rabbinic tshuva authored by Rabbi Rembaum said we can add the imahot optionally, and then also we can change the closing bracha to Magen Avraham Ufoked Sarah, blessed are you Hashem, who protects Abraham and remembers Sarah. That's how I'll translate Poked. By the way, in most Reform Siddurim, with which I'm familiar, it says Magen Avraham ve'ezrat Sarah, okay, helper of Sarah. I've never discussed this with the editor of the Reform Siddur, but I'm guessing here's why they say that. Poked is the verb that is used when God did what for Sarah? God remembered her by doing what? Unmute and say it.
Having a child.
Giving her a son.
Right. Hashem pakad et Sarah kasher amar. God remembered Sarah as he had said, and he gave her a son who was Isaac. So one might argue if that's the epithet we give Sarah, it's not exactly really parallel to Abraham. It's like Abraham went through all these travails and you helped him, and Sarah was a baby maker. Okay, it can have that connotation to people. Your only way of relating to her was you gave her a baby, right? So if we're really trying, one might argue, if we're really trying to egalitarianize, okay, so that's not all that egalitarian. And so it's changed to a more general term, Ezrat Sarah. Now, the thing I would say is, I don't know if Ezrat Sarah, because Ezra means helper, I don't know if that phrase actually comes from anywhere in the Bible or the author of the Siddur made it up. If anyone wants to track that down for me, Bernie, get into your Reform network and do some research and find out, was the phrase Ezrat Sarah just invented by a Reform prayer book author, or does it actually have any, I'm going to say, historical resonance? Does it come from any source? I'd be interested to know that. I'll look that up also. Okay. Now, halachically, I said I wasn't going to diverge at all. We're just going to do text. But halachically, the halacha says, Shulchan Aruch says, you shouldn't change the wording of any of the first three or last three brachot. But the thing you really, really, really shouldn't do is change the chatima, or the closing formulation, of any of the blessings. So there are people who halachically, their needle threading, all of these are just such, to other people, it's just nitpicky, nitpicky, Pharisaic nitpicking, right? So there are people who say, well, maybe you can insert Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Yaakov, Rachel, Elohei Leah, but you can't change Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avraham to Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avraham Ufoked Sarah, because you know what? The Shulchan Aruch says you can't change the chatima of any blessing in the Amidah, period, right? So I do know egalitarian honoring people who add the matriarchs, but then say Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avraham. By the way, in LA, if you go to Ikar, Rabbi Brous is one of those places, right? So she's frum enough to feel like you shouldn't change Magen Avraham, but flexible enough to think you do say Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah. Okay, so that's kind of a nitpicky halachic thing. Okay. That's all I'm going to say about that for a long time, about the imahot. Okay, so I'm going back to the text. So we acknowledge you, Hashem, God, a deity of our ancestors, and now we name those ancestors. Okay. Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanora, El Elyon, the deity who is great, mighty, awful, supreme deity. Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanora is from somewhere in the Bible. El Elyon is from somewhere else in the Bible. So these are all phrases that are cannibalized from different places in the Tanakh. Gomel chasadim tovim v'konei hakol. You requite or repay kind acts. That's what Gomel chasadim tovim literally means. It's really acts of loyalty, right? You requite, which is a fancy English word for pay off for or recompense, right? So you repay good acts of loyalty, true acts of loyalty, chasadim tovim, v'konei hakol. Konei in modern Hebrew means to buy. In biblical Hebrew, it means to make or create. Okay? So you are the creator of all. We know that from biblical Hebrew. Cain, Adam and Eve's son, is named Cain with a kuf. And his mother, Eve, says, I called him this name, Ki kaniti ish me'et Hashem, because I have made a human being with God. I have created a human being with God's partnership. So liknot means to create or to make, and then secondarily it also means to acquire. Okay, but here it probably means creator of all. What does our English translation say? It's a creator of all. There we go. Okay. Vizocher chasdei avot, and you remember the faithful acts of our ancestors. Some people, if they're liberal about texting, will add in Vizocher chasdei avot v'imahot, although that's not part of the conservative tshuva, and you'll notice we do not have that on page 36b. Do we have by the way, do we have the imahot? We don't have the matriarchs. Candace, what prayer book are you using? Hold it up. Oh, well, that's a Sephardi Orthodox one. That for sure that doesn't have any matriarchs for two reasons. It's Sephardic and it's Orthodox. We got two strikes against the matriarchs there. Okay. But Candace, you know what I'm talking about? That conservative prayer books add in the names of the matriarchs. That's what we're talking about, right? Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Some conservative prayer books do, and certainly I would think all Reform prayer books nowadays. Okay. Zocher chasdei avot, remembering the loyal acts of our ancestors. Umevi goel livnei v'nehem, and bringing a redeemer to their descendants, their children's children. So we have here time. You remember that loyalty of our ancestors. That's before our time. And you bring redemption to their descendants, which means us or our children. So we have past and future. Okay. Why do you do this, God? Do you do this because you owe it to us? Do you do it because we have enough mitzvah points in the bank so we're entitled to demand that you pay off? No, it's lema'an shemo b'ahava. Okay, so you bring redemption for the sake of your name. Again, name is a symbolic way of saying essence. Okay, for the sake of your name, lovingly. This is an act of love. Joanna says that some Sephardi prayer books have Hannah's prayer prefacing the Amidah. I'll have to take a look for that. I have some Sephardi prayer books. I haven't seen one. Joanna, tell us.
not prefacing the Amidah is like the first page of the whole prayer book.
Oh, I got it. The whole prayer book. Okay, got it. So our ancestors, you do this for the sake of your essence, lovingly. And then we have this interpolation, Zochreinu L'chaim, which we add on high holidays, but that's really an interruption which we normally skip. So don't think of Melech Ozer Fokedu Moshiach Again as like a next paragraph. It's not. This is all one paragraph, one bracha unit. Okay? L'man Shemo B'Ava, Melech Ozer U'Moshiach U'Magein, monarch, king, who is helping and saving and protecting, although in our Egal version, it's Melech Ozer Ufoked Umoshiach Umagain. So the verb that we use having to do with God remembering Sarah, we stick that verb in there also. Okay? So God, who is essentially protector, right? Baruch Atah Hashem, Magain Avraham. Blessed are you, Hashem, who protected Abraham. Or Magain Avraham ve'ezrat Sarah, protected Abraham and supported Sarah. Or Magain Avraham ufoked Sarah, protected Abraham and took notice of Sarah. Took notice is a better translation of foked than remember. Okay. So basically, let's just sort of step back from the bracha. Let's get the helicopter view. We're coming in our audience before the king, and we are saying, O king, you are great and mighty. You are, O deity of our ancestors. Okay? So I come in before the king and I say, you know, my ancestors have served this kingdom loyalty, your highness, for you and your father and your father's father, right? That's what you would say if you were some villager coming before the king. Myself and my parents and my ancestors, they've loyalty served you and your father the king and his father the king for many generations back, oh, your highness. That's what you would say to introduce yourself if you're coming before the king. You're giving kind of your cred. Who am I? I'm just a simple villager. What standing do I have to come before the king? Okay? We have been loyal supporters of yours and taxpayers for many generations, your highness. Okay? So we start with our cred. Our cred is our ancestors. Okay? Almighty God, you are the God who pays off on acts of loyalty. All right? And you are the creator of everything. You can do anything, right? So God, you repay loyalty, and we know you are capable of anything. Okay, because as we said, you're so mighty, you repay loyalty, you can do anything. You remember, sometimes I do this trick as a therapist, when I'm working with families, things that I want to tell parents they ought to think or feel, instead of saying to them, you ought to be thinking or feeling this, I say, I am sure that you are thinking about how it affects your daughter when you talk about her eating habits at the table. I say that as a therapist trick, rather than saying, you idiot, can't you think about how it affects your daughter when you talk about her eating habits at the table? I assume the best of someone. It's a little bit of little Jedi mind control that I try to do, right? So that's what we're doing here with God. We're saying, you remember the loyalty of ancestors. Because what am I doing? What am I doing in this bracha and the rest of the Amidah? I am going to be asking for stuff. So I start out, again, I'm starting on a very concrete level here of interpretation. We'll get to sort of more sophisticated levels of interpretation, but I'm starting on a very concrete level. I'm coming before the king. Okay, I'm going to ask for stuff. So I say, you know what? I'm descended from a line of people who've served you for a long time, and I know that you are the powerful monarch, and I know that you repay loyalties, and that you remember the loyalty of my ancestors. That's what V'zocher Chastei Avot means. So what's standing behind this is the idea that we don't have enough status or mitzvah points to be able to ask God for what we want. It's humility. I'm relying on the merit of my lineage, all right? And we see this lots of times, like in the slichot, in the slichot or penitential prayers we say around High Holiday and Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur time. We don't say, what we sometimes say, do this for the sake of the ancestors, right? Avraham was great. He did all kinds of great things. I haven't done great things, right? Do this for the sake of our ancestors who are faithful for you. Do this for the sake of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. Sorry. Okay, so you remember the loyalty of the ancestors, and you bring, which could either mean now or in the future, a redeemer, meaning we are part of this lineage that has a past and a future, right? I am part of this people. So in this first blessing, I am locating myself as a part of this people. I'm not coming before you just as an individual. I'm an individual who comes from a particular lineage that has a past and a future. And why do you do all these things? Is it because you owe it to us? Is it because we're a big nation? We're a wonderful nation. We have Nobel Prize winners disproportionately. No, it's Lema'an Shemo B'Ahava. God, you do this, right? Because this is your nature, and it is loving. So there, right? So you are the God who saves, Magen Avraham, or Magen Avraham Be'ezrat Sarah. Someone says they are hung up on the word chesed. Okay, so in biblical Hebrew, so words can mean many things. In biblical Hebrew originally, chesed generally means acts of loyalty. Okay, it has a sort of later meaning of mercy or kindness, right? So in current Orthodox Hebrew, a chesed is an act of kindness, like the Chesed Society, okay? But originally it means loyalty. God is Rav Chesed Ve'emet, which means loyal and faithful. Faithful would be another word, right, besides loyal, right? It means that, meaning reliable to, you can rely on God to keep faith. It's not about love. There is a later meaning in the Bible about love, but core original meaning is loyalty or faithfulness. It is translated by the author of the King James Bible, 1611, as loving kindness, which apparently is a word that the authors of the King James Bible made up. It did not exist in English before. It's a portmanteau of loving and kindness. They couldn't sort of decide. But that's probably not its original meaning. So Chasdei Avot means our ancestors' acts of faithfulness to you.
So,
Ilana.
Yeah, so just to be clear, when you say that that's the meaning in biblical Hebrew, does that then mean that applies to all of our
since this is rabbinic
liturgy?
Since this is rabbinic Hebrew?
Right,
I guess we'd have to say in context here, what does it mean and what could it mean? It could mean they're acts of loyalty to you. So now I'm asking you to do what you promised, God, which is to bring a goel, a redeemer. If you're really reliable, faithful, and loyal, okay, then you'll bring a redeemer. But we have ahava here, and so you might want to make it mean love. You might want to make it mean piety, meaning it might connote that to you, and I have no objection to that. Okay, and I'll go one step further. Not only do I have no objection to that, Ilana, but who knows what the rabbinic authors who composed this blessing understood the word to mean. Okay, So maybe it means you repay acts of piety that our ancestors did. Maybe it means you repay acts of loyalty that our ancestors did. Maybe it means you repay acts of love that our ancestors did, which wouldn't be doing too much violence to the term and context, because we do have be'ahava, right?
Mm-hmm.
You do all this lovingly, right? So I think that's open to interpretation. Alan, unmute.
Yes, okay. Rabbi Dorff has viewed this paragraph in a way of, we raise these things of chesed and what sounds kind of like, God, you owe us one. You don't do it for our sakes, but because of what our ancestors did, we recite their good deeds and say, please take care of us. It follows through, but for me, it's always been helpful. It's almost like a tit for tat, which on one level, it seems strange asking God to do it in that particular way.
Uh-huh.
But it really is what we're saying. It says, we're not worthy, we can't do it, but for the sake of our ancestors, please take care of us and bring us redemption and bring us all these things.
Right. So we talked earlier today about that framework, and that could be a framework for understanding the blessing, which would cause Ilana to furrow her brow because she wants chasdei to be piety, and maybe someone else in one of the Hollywood squares up here wants it to mean love, rather than have it be tit for tat, which could feel grubby. Dare I say it? Kind of grubby. Okay. So I'm just saying, Alan, what you said, we said earlier today. So these are just different interpretive frameworks.
Right.
And again, because now we're talking about what does this mean to you? So of course, I'm not going to argue with what does it mean to you, unless you said something like I thought totally wrong, like you said, chasdei Hashem means, I don't know, tuna fish. Then I'd say, oh, that's wrong. It doesn't mean that. Okay. But other than that, this is open to interpretation. Ilana?
Yeah, just to say, the reason I'm furrowing is because I guess I'm back to that word loyalty, which it seems to me can be shaded in different ways. So maybe the answer is both. Maybe it's loyalty, I don't know, based on ahava, or it's based on deeds of, it's based on faithfulness rather than loyalty, because you better swear allegiance or you'll have a pretty dire consequence, because the king is pretty
which we could argue is not really true loyalty.
Yeah.
Right. So true loyalty is, right, I stick with you to the end, as our ancestors did, by the way. You know, I don't know, to the funeral pyres of the Crusades.
Right.
Right. So, and what we're saying to God, by the way, and I think I want to close with what I'm about to say, and then we'll stop for today, and we'll come back to this bracha more next week. I'm thinking of that Holocaust poem, I believe in the sun even when it is not shining, right? Yeah. So perhaps standing behind this bracha is, and the implication of the Goel, the Redeemer. I don't necessarily see redemption, which means the world being perfected, us being saved and the world being perfected. I don't necessarily see that 1 foot in front of my face, okay? But I believe that Hashem is reliable and faithful to fulfill that. Faithfulness is another word for loyalty, okay? Right? And that mirrors, we hope that mirrors our ancestors' great loyalty and faithfulness to you. Okay. And Joanna wants to say something about chesed, but we're going to leave that for next week. Okay. We will resume next week, and we're going to talk some more. So next week, we're going to talk more about how does this bracha resonate with you? How can it be used as a psycho-spiritual entry point to the Amidah as a whole? we'll talk about that for the next couple of weeks, God willing. Okay. Everyone have a good day. Be Torah. Stay healthy.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.